Why did European nations race to colonize North America between 1607 and 1754? There's a lot of context. Imagine standing on the shores of the Atlantic in the early 1600s. Ships from Spain, France, the Netherlands, and England appear on the horizon, each with their own dreams and goals. It's like watching a race for riches and new beginnings. The Spanish seek gold and aim to spread their faith, establishing settlements like St. Augustine, Florida, the oldest European city in the United States. Founded in 1565, and missions in California, led by Father Junipero Serra, starting in 1769. They also expand into regions like Texas and New Mexico, where they interact with Native American tribes such as the Comanche and Apache. For instance, in Santa Fe, established in 1610, the Spanish engaged in trade and cultural exchanges with local Pueblo peoples. The French trade furs with Native Americans, forming alliances and settling along the St. Lawrence River, found in Quebec in 1608 under Samuel de Champlain, and in the Mississippi Valley, establishing New Orleans in 1718. Their relationships with tribes like the Huron and Algonquin are based on mutual benefit, trading European goods for valuable beaver pelts. This cooperation often includes intermarriage and cultural exchange, creating a unique blend of French and native cultures. For example, French traders adopt native canoes for navigating rivers, enhancing their mobility and trade networks. The Dutch set up colonies like New Amsterdam, which later becomes New York, focusing on trade and welcoming people from many backgrounds. They established the Dutch West India Company to manage trade and colonization, bringing settlers from not only the Netherlands, but also from other parts of Europe. Their policy of religious tolerance attracts a diverse population, including Jewish settlers seeking refuge from persecution. In 1654, 23 Jewish refugees from Brazil arrive in New Amsterdam, marking the beginning of the Jewish community in North America. Lesser-known efforts include Sweden, establishing New Sweden in parts of Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania from 1638 to 1655, introducing log cabin construction to America. These Swedish settlers, though eventually overtaken by the Dutch, leave a lasting architectural legacy in the colonies. The use of log cabins becomes a common building style among frontier settlers. The British seek new lands to settle, founding Jamestown in Virginia in 1607 and Plymouth in Massachusetts in 1620. The Jamestown settlers, funded by the Virginia Company, are motivated by the prospect of finding gold and other riches. However, they face severe hardships, including famine and conflict with local tribes, like the Powhatan Confederacy. The introduction of tobacco cultivation by John Rolfe in 1612 eventually turns the colony profitable. In Plymouth, the Pilgrims, seeking religious freedom, signed the Mayflower Compact to establish self-governance, setting a precedent for future colonies. But why did they come? Europe was changing. The desire for wealth, the search for religious freedom, and the competition for global power drove these nations across the ocean. Economic opportunities beckoned, especially after tales of the New World's riches reached Europe. The Spanish success in extracting gold and silver from their colonies in Mexico and Peru spurs other nations to seek their fortunes. Additionally, religious conflicts, such as the Protestant Reformation, create divisions in Europe, prompting groups like the Puritans and Pilgrims to seek a place where they can practice their faith freely. The Edict of Nantes in 1598 grants limited religious freedom in France, but is revoked in 1685, leading Huguenots, French Protestants, to flee to the colonies. Between 1607 and 1754, over 500,000 Europeans immigrated to North America, bringing their cultures and ambitions with them. People from various parts of Europe sought new opportunities. For example, the Palatine Germans, fleeing war and hardship in the early 1700s, settled in Pennsylvania and New York, adding to the diversity of the colonies. They bring skills in farming and craftsmanship, contributing to the economic growth of these areas. As William Penn said about his colony of Pennsylvania, it was to be a place where the persecuted and distressed of every nation might find a safe retreat. The arrival of Europeans drastically affected the Native American populations. Diseases like smallpox spread rapidly, causing the deaths of an estimated up to 90% of the indigenous peoples in some regions. For instance, the Massachusetts tribe, which once numbered in the thousands, was reduced to a few hundred survivors by the early 1630s. Native societies faced immense challenges. Some tribes formed alliances with European powers to protect their interests, like the Iroquois Confederacy aligning with the British to gain access to European goods and weapons. Others resisted encroachment through warfare or negotiation, striving to maintain their lands and cultures. A Native American leader, Chief Powhatan, expressed his concerns to John Smith in 1609. "Why should you take by force that which you can have from us by love?" Colonization also transformed the land. Forests were cleared for farms and settlements. In New England, vast areas of woodland were cut down for timber and to make room for agriculture. This deforestation impacts the local environment, leading to soil erosion and changes in wildlife habitats. Rivers were altered for mills and dams, affecting fish populations and water flow. The intensive farming of cash crops, such as tobacco in Virginia, led to soil depletion. Planters often exhausted the land and moved westward in search of new fertile ground, pushing further into Native American territories and causing more conflicts. This westward push can be seen as a rolling wave, constantly reshaping the frontier. Native Americans had managed the land sustainably before European arrival. They used practices like controlled burns to manage forests, promoting the growth of certain plants and creating habitats for game animals. For example, the Cherokee used fire to clear underbrush, which encouraged the growth of berry-producing plants. This approach maintained the health of the ecosystem and supported hunting and gathering. European settlers often misunderstood these practices, sometimes viewing the land as untamed and in need of civilizing. The Columbian Exchange introduced new plants and animals to both Europe and the Americas. Europeans brought crops like wheat and sugarcane, and animals like horses, cows, and pigs, which transformed Native American lifestyles. The introduction of the horse, for instance, revolutionized the way of life for tribes on the Great Plains, such as the Sioux and the Cheyenne, who became skilled horsemen and hunters of buffalo. Conversely, American crops like corn, potatoes, and tomatoes were taken back to Europe, dramatically impacting European diets and leading to population growth. Sir Walter Raleigh popularized tobacco in England after exploring the Americas, influencing social customs. In the British colonies, regional differences emerged. In the South, colonies like Virginia and South Carolina developed economies based on cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. These plantations relied heavily on slave labor. By 1750, the enslaved population in the southern colonies reached over 200,000, making up about 40% of the region's population. In South Carolina, the cultivation of rice was introduced by enslaved Africans, who brought their knowledge of rice-growing techniques from West Africa. The Gullah culture in the coastal regions preserved African traditions, influencing language and cuisine. In the North, colonies like Massachusetts focused on trade, shipbuilding, and small farms. The economy was more diverse, including fishing, lumber, and commerce. The abundance of timber led to a thriving shipbuilding industry, with ports like Boston becoming centers of maritime trade. Merchants engaged in trade not only with England, but also with the West Indies and other colonies. Salem became known for its merchant fleet, and infamously for the Salem witch trials of 1692. The middle colonies, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, became known for their fertile soil and grew grains, earning them the nickname the breadbasket colonies. They exported wheat and flour to other colonies and to Europe. They also had diverse populations, including Germans, Scots-Irish, and Dutch, contributing to a rich cultural mosaic. For example, Germantown, founded in 1683 near Philadelphia, became a hub for German immigrants, preserving their language and traditions. These immigrants introduced the Conestoga wagon, which later played a significant role in westward expansion. Religious practices varied between and within regions. In New England, the Puritans established a society centered around strict religious observance. However, dissenting groups like the Baptists and the Methodists began to emerge, challenging established norms. Roger Williams, a Puritan minister, advocated for separation of church and state and was banished from Massachusetts, leading him to found Rhode Island in 1636, a colony known for religious tolerance. Anne Hutchinson also challenged religious authorities, holding meetings in her home to discuss sermons, which led to her trial and banishment. In the middle colonies, religious tolerance was more common, with Quakers, Catholics, Lutherans, and Jews living side by side. Maryland was founded as a haven for Catholics facing persecution in England under the leadership of Lord Baltimore. The Maryland Toleration Act of 1649 granted religious freedom to all Christians. In Pennsylvania, William Penn established policies of fair treatment towards Native Americans and freedom of worship, attracting a diverse population. The Great Awakening of the 1730s and 1740s affected regions differently. In the South, it led to the growth of Baptist and Methodist congregations among poorer settlers and enslaved people. Preachers like Samuel Davies spread evangelical messages, emphasizing personal faith over institutional rituals. In New England, it challenged the established Puritan churches, leading to divisions and new denominations. Preacher George Whitefield drew crowds of thousands, urging people to seek a personal connection with God. He once proclaimed, "The kingdom of heaven must be taken by storm." His passionate sermons broke down denominational barriers and inspired a sense of shared American identity. Churches played a central role in daily life, especially in New England towns. They served not just religious functions, but also social and educational ones. Communities gathered in meeting houses for worship, town meetings, and schooling. The church was often the heart of the community, where important decisions were made and people connected with one another. For example, in Salem, Massachusetts, the meeting house was the center of the infamous witch trials of 1692, reflecting the intertwining of religion and governance. Governance in the colonies varied. Documents like the Mayflower Compact of 1620 and the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut of 1639 established principles of self-governance and democratic practices. The Mayflower Compact was an agreement among the Pilgrims to form a civil body politic and abide by laws for the good of the colony. In Virginia, the House of Burgesses formed in 1619 as the first representative assembly in the colonies. These developments planted early seeds of democratic ideals. The legal systems were influenced by English common law. Local courts and magistrates handled disputes, applying principles brought from England, but also adapting to the new environment. Labor was a critical issue. Initially, colonies relied on indentured servants from Europe. These were people from England, Ireland, and Scotland who agreed to work for a certain number of years in exchange for passage to America. The headright system in Virginia granted 50 acres of land to those who brought over indentured servants, encouraging settlement. However, as the need for labor grew, especially on southern plantations, the colonies increasingly turned to African slavery. The Atlantic slave trade forcibly brought over 300,000 Africans to the British North American colonies by 1750. This tragic practice had long-lasting effects on American society. Enslaved people resisted their conditions in various ways. Some, like the participants in the Stono Rebellion of 1739 in South Carolina, took up arms in an attempt to gain freedom. They marched towards Spanish Florida, where freedom was promised, but were ultimately defeated. Others practiced subtle forms of resistance, such as work slowdowns, sabotage, or preserving African cultural traditions despite prohibitions. Slave codes, such as the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, defined the legal status of enslaved Africans and regulated their behavior, reinforcing racial hierarchies. These laws stripped enslaved people of basic rights, legally entrenching slavery as a lifelong and hereditary condition. Intermarriage between Europeans and Native Americans or Africans occurred, leading to mixed heritage populations. In French territories, the Métis people emerged from unions between French fur traders and Native American women. These communities often blended cultures, languages, and traditions, contributing to the diversity of colonial society. In Spanish colonies, the mestizo population grew, a term used to describe people of mixed European and Native American ancestry. These mixed heritage groups often act as cultural bridges between communities. Interactions with Native Americans were complex. While the French often formed cooperative relationships, the British frequently experienced conflict. Events like King Philip's War in 1675 to 1676 resulted in significant loss of life on both sides. Metacom, also known as King Philip, led the Wampanoag and other tribes in an effort to push back the settlers. He lamented, "I am determined not to live until I have no country." Bacon's rebellion in 1676 reflected tensions between frontier settlers and colonial authorities, as well as conflicts with Native Americans. The rebellion was led by Nathaniel Bacon, who declared, "We must defend ourselves against all enemies." The colonies also interacted with each other in various ways. Trade among the colonies was common, with goods like grain, tobacco, and timber moving between regions. Intercolonial trade agreements helped stabilize prices and supply. However, there were also rivalries, such as disputes over land boundaries or competitions for resources. Tensions sometimes arose between established settlers and new immigrants, or between different religious or ethnic communities, leading to regional conflicts among colonists. For example, the Paxton Boys, a group of Scots-Irish frontiersmen in Pennsylvania, attacked Native American communities in 1763, reflecting internal colonial tensions. European rivalries played out in the New World. The French and Indian War saw the British and French fight for control of North America, with various Native American tribes aligning with each side. The war began over disputes in the Ohio River Valley, a region rich in resources and strategic value. George Washington, then a young officer, participated in early skirmishes, gaining military experience. Colonial militias played a crucial role in conflicts like this war. Men from different colonies formed militias to defend their settlements. These militias were often poorly trained, but gained valuable experience that would later be important during the American Revolution. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763, drastically altering the balance of power. France ceded its territories east of the Mississippi River to Britain, reshaping the map of North America. During the French and Indian War, Benjamin Franklin proposed the Albany Plan of Union in 1754, which aimed to create a unified government for the 13 colonies. Although the plan was not adopted, it was an early attempt at forming a federal union and showed a growing sense of unity among the colonies. Franklin illustrated this with his famous "Join or Die" political cartoon, depicting a snake cut into pieces representing the colonies. This symbolized the belief that unity was necessary for survival. Ideas were also changing. The Enlightenment introduced concepts of liberty and individual rights. John Locke's philosophies influenced colonial thinking, questioning the authority of monarchies. He wrote about the rights to life, liberty, and property, which later inspired American leaders like Thomas Jefferson, who echoed these ideas in the Declaration of Independence. Colonists embraced Enlightenment ideas to varying degrees. In cities like Philadelphia and Boston, intellectuals discussed these concepts in salons and published pamphlets. Benjamin Franklin himself was a key figure in spreading Enlightenment ideas, founding the American Philosophical Society in 1743 to promote knowledge. Education became more widespread. Institutions like Harvard, 1636, and Yale, 1701, were founded to train clergy and later expanded their curricula. Literacy rates in New England reached around 70% for men, among the highest in the world at the time. However, educational opportunities were limited for women and minorities. While some girls received basic education at home or in dame schools, higher education was largely inaccessible. Enslaved Africans were often prohibited from learning to read and write, though some learned in secret. Phyllis Wheatley, an enslaved African woman, became a published poet, with her first book released in 1773. She wrote, "In every human breast, God has implanted a principle, which we call love of freedom." Technological advancements also occurred. Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod in 1752, improving safety during storms. He also invented bifocal glasses and the Franklin stove, contributing to daily life improvements. Improvements in printing technology allowed for wider dissemination of newspapers and pamphlets, fostering communication among the colonies. John Peter Zenger's trial in 1735 established a precedent for freedom of the press after he was acquitted of libel charges for publishing criticisms of the governor of New York. This case emphasized the importance of a free press and holding authorities accountable. Artisan and craft trades developed in colonial towns. Skilled trades like blacksmithing, carpentry, and printing became essential to the economy. Apprenticeships allowed young people to learn these trades. Guilds and trade associations formed, setting standards and supporting their members. Paul Revere, a silversmith in Boston, became known for his craftsmanship and later his role in the American Revolution. His engraving of the Boston Massacre would become a powerful piece of propaganda, fueling anti-British sentiments. Colonial economies were subject to British policies like mercantilism, which aimed to benefit the mother country. Acts like the Navigation Acts regulated trade, causing frustration among colonists who felt restricted. The Wool Act of 1699 and the Iron Act of 1750 restricted manufacturing in the colonies, aiming to keep them dependent on British goods. This tension planted early seeds of dissent. The triangular trade was a key component of colonial economics. Ships carried rum and goods from New England to Africa, traded for enslaved Africans who were transported to the West Indies, where sugar and molasses were obtained and brought back to New England to make rum. This system linked the economies of 3 continents. The economic impact of mercantilism created trade imbalances that benefited Britain at the colony's expense. Colonists were often forced to sell raw materials at low prices and buy manufactured goods at high prices. This situation hindered economic growth and led to resentment towards British economic policies. As James Otis stated in 1761, "Taxation without representation is tyranny, reflecting growing discontent." Colonial currency issues added to economic difficulties. There was a lack of standardized currency, and colonies often faced shortages of hard money. Some colonies used commodity money, like tobacco certificates, or issued paper money, which sometimes led to inflation. The British government discouraged the use of paper currency, further complicating trade and commerce. The Currency Act of 1751 restricted the issuance of paper money in New England, causing economic strain. Development of roads and infrastructure began to improve communication and trade between colonies. Projects like the King's Highway connected Boston to Charleston, facilitating the movement of goods and people. Improved infrastructure helped unify the colonies and supported economic growth. It was like building the veins of a growing body, connecting distant parts into a functioning whole. Post roads allowed for the faster delivery of mail, enhancing communication. Piracy and privateering affected colonial trade and security. Pirates like Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, attacked ships along the coast, disrupting commerce. During conflicts like Queen Anne's War, privateers were authorized to seize enemy vessels, blurring the lines between piracy and legitimate naval warfare. These activities highlighted the vulnerabilities of colonial trade routes. The capture of Blackbeard in 1718 by forces from Virginia and North Carolina marked a significant effort to secure maritime commerce. Land ownership and distribution were crucial to colonial society. In Dutch colonies, systems like the patroonships granted large tracts of land to wealthy individuals who brought over tenants to farm it. In the English colonies, the availability of land attracted many settlers. Land ownership was a primary source of wealth and social status, and disputes over land often led to regional conflicts among colonists. For many settlers, owning land represented freedom and opportunity, a stark contrast to the rigid class structures of Europe. The promise of land ownership was a powerful draw for immigrants seeking a better life. Wars in Europe had effects on the colonies. The War of Spanish Succession, known in the colonies as Queen Anne's War, affected colonial policies, economies, and security. Colonists fought alongside British forces against French and Spanish interests in North America, leading to territorial changes and increased military experience. These conflicts often spilled over into the colonies, making them theaters of international rivalry. The capture of the French fortress at Louisbourg by New England colonists in 1745 during King George's War demonstrated colonial military capabilities. Natural disasters challenged colonial settlements. Harsh winters, such as the Little Ice Age conditions in the 1600s, affected crop yields and survival rates. The winter of 1609 to 1610, known as the Starving Time in Jamestown, saw settlers resort to desperate measures as food ran out. Hurricanes and droughts could devastate communities, influencing migration patterns and settlement decisions. Such events tested the resilience of the colonists and shaped their relationship with the environment. In 1692, an earthquake in New England caused panic, interpreted by some as a sign of divine displeasure. Colonial attitudes towards authority evolved over time. Frontier life and Enlightenment ideas fostered sentiments of self-reliance and skepticism toward distant rulers. Colonists began to question British policies and assert their rights, laying the groundwork for future independence movements. As Patrick Henry famously declared in 1775, "Give me liberty or give me death." This growing desire for autonomy was fueled by experiences of self-governance and frustrations with British interference. So why did so many European nations race to colonize North America? They sought wealth, land, and opportunities. The quest for resources and power drove them across the ocean. But as they established colonies, a new society began to form, a society that blended different cultures, ideas, and peoples. And yet, while the colonies became more connected to Britain, they also grew apart. Like a teenager seeking independence from a parent, the colonies began to desire self-rule. Seeds of the American Revolution were planted long before 1776. Various acts passed by the British Parliament, such as the Navigation Acts, Wool Act, and Iron Act, caused resentment among colonists who wanted to develop their own industries. The Proclamation of 1763, issued after the French and Indian War, restricted colonial expansion west of the Appalachian Mountains, leading to further discontent. This barrier to westward migration frustrated settlers eager for new land. As we reflect on this era, we can see how the motivations and actions of the colonists set the stage for the American Revolution. The question arises, how did these early experiences shape the values and institutions we have today? The emphasis on self-governance, economic freedom, and individual rights during this period laid the foundation for the principles enshrined in the Constitution and continue to influence American society. The struggles and triumphs of these early settlers resonate in the ideals of democracy and liberty that define the United States. In conclusion, from 1607 to 1754, European nations colonized North America for wealth, power, and opportunity. This period was marked by exploration, settlement, conflict, and the blending of cultures. The interactions between Europeans, Native Americans, and Africans created a complex history that continues to affect us. Understanding this past helps us comprehend the roots of our nation and the challenges we still face. The colonization era set in motion patterns of migration, cultural exchange, and conflict that have shaped the modern world. So, standing on those shores again, watching the ships arrive, we witness not just a race for land, but the beginnings of a country that will value freedom and self-governance. The story of colonization is the story of how diverse peoples and ideas came together to build a new world. It's a tale of ambition, struggle, and the enduring human spirit's quest for a better life. This history reminds us of where we've come from and guides us in shaping a future that honors those foundational values.